This is Washington wide receiver Rome Odunze.
How often do you get a wide receiver that catches 75% of his contested catches? 6'3", 212 pounds, super productive at Washington, 4-year player, but still only 22 years old on draft night. Average 109 yards per game. Basically an X wide receiver. They'll move him on the inside to get some slot fades going because his ability to play through contact and win at the catch point is like the baseline of his profile. But I think as we get into this, there's a little bit more nuance and a little more route running and a more well-rounded route tree than what most people want to give him credit for.
Yeah, and he did everything at the NFL Combine, which is a rarity now when talking about prospects. A 4.4 540, again at 212 pounds, a 1.52 10-yard split, 85th percentile vert, 69th percentile broad jump, 66th percentile three cone, 91st percentile shuttle. That is a tremendous athlete with great size. A few other numbers that matter. He had 48 catches of 15 plus yards this past season. 52% of all of his catches went for 15 plus yards. And when you're talking about how those were manufactured and where they originated from, 113 of his 115 targets were outside the numbers this past season, 72%. So you talked about it. X wide receivers, oftentimes at the line of scrimmage, out routes, post routes, sitting in zones. These are all the difficult things that NFL wide receivers have to do that typically we have to project from the college level to Sundays. Rome Odunze already has it littered on his tape.
Yeah. I saw him on the plane going into Vegas for the Super Bowl, and his upper body is so jacked. That's super impressive.
It is. And I think it plays into what you talked about with his contested catch numbers. We've talked about it so often with some of these other wide receiver prospects where their slight shoulders or their lack of weight allows these corners in jump ball situations to work through their body or into their hands. Rome Odunze is broad. He is a large upper body dude where it plays into winning these tough 50-50 balls.
I also wrote that he's a pain in the ass to tackle after the catch. He's not like going to completely light it up like Malik Nabers does, but he's like getting those tough yards like that. It's 39. He caught that slant route at 7 yards and he needs to fight for the last 2. He's going to consistently do that. And I think that some people are like, oh, what's his speed? Like those contested catches, like, is that because he can't create separation? I don't necessarily think so. I think that he was just so dominant in those situations that they just kept asking him to win in these 3rd and longs, these slot fades in the red zone, and he kept coming down with them. So they kept going back to, and I think that his speed is like decent 4.47 speed. That's the 47th percentile among drafted wide receivers. But I think that's plenty fast enough for what he's asked to do because he keeps these defenders on their toes. He plays with tempo because they're worried about having to tackle him, because they're worried that he's just going to get mossed. That it's kind of a tough player to defend. And I've seen some really, really high-end comps for him. Some names I had written down. Plays like DeAndre Hopkins. There's some contested catches like Dez Bryant back in the day. Alshon Jeffrey was this type of player. I think the baseline is you're getting Cortland Sutton production, winning at the high point down the field. But I think the most likely outcome for him is he's going to show the ability to win on slant routes, in breaking routes, out breaking routes, and be a true number 1 wide receiver. That's not just a contested catch guy, somebody that can like consistently win, creating separation.
My comparison was Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson stood out to me as my go-to. And to be honest, their measurements are almost exactly the same. Allen Robinson's slightly shorter at 6'2", but 220 pounds. We get great vert, great broad, great shuttle, slightly less three cone, and then a much slower 40-yard dash from Allen Robinson. Wins on a lot of outside releases to fades along the sideline, bucket tracking, back shoulder. He's got that all. And there's more power in his game versus other wide receivers that we've seen over the last 2+ years. He uses his hands to separate on 2nd and 3rd moves, which I think plays into that contested targets that you're talking about, where Michael Penix kind of understood, oh, if this option isn't open, Rome Odunze is always open, even if there's not separation. And so creating that sliver of space on, again, that almost 3rd read at times, it played into him being such a go-to powerhouse in this offense. Like, it really is as simple to me. Legit routes plus precision plus size plus athleticism is just an awesome combination. Throw it up to him if you have to. And this is the entire package that Rome Odunze brings to the table.
That short shuttle you talked about, the 93rd percentile, like that is the kind of rare part of this like X receiver profile. There's a lot of X receivers that are a little bit too stiff and they can win down the field in kind of a straight line. But I think that Rome Odunze plays with bend, can sink his hips, and we see that not just in the short shuttle. Remember, he was the one that was like trying the 3-cone a million times because he wanted even better score. But it's already good enough. And if you flip on the tape, I think that you're going to be able to see a little bit more bend than you're kind of used to with this X receiver trait. The recent draft class like comp that it came back with was like
none from last year.
Right. Well, I mean, not from, yeah, of course not last year's disaster, but Drake London kind of wins in similar ways. Drake London is a little bit taller than Rome Odunze, but really physical guys. And I thought what made both of those two guys really impressive was sink and then get on these in-breaking routes. And I think that both of those guys, both top 10 picks, that's kind of like the very good starting point.
And obviously, Washington Huskies offensive coordinator is now the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. They did some downfield screens with him this past year, which kind of factored into that Drake London stuff that we talked about when he was coming out. He's not perfect, though. He's not perfect. So are there any negatives that stood out to you? For me, it did seem like corners were in his hip pocket more often than the other two top wide receivers in this class. And like if we are talking about the other big wide receiver in this class, which is Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top of the draft, I thought Washington did a better job of using full field spacing to get almost isolated wide receiver reps in favorable matchups for Rome Odunze than, let's say, Ohio State did with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference when it comes to the frame and just how nuanced of a route runner. And I think Marvin Harrison has that a little bit more polished than Rome Odunze. I will say, as just a human being, like go listen to Rome Odunze talk in an interview. This guy is, I wish I had his maturity. And I'm
asking for the negatives, Hayden, and you can't stop with the positives.
Okay, so the negative would be he's not elite in the speed department. I think that's kind of where some of this, it's not a lack of separation, but he's not going to wow you away like Malik Nabers is going to. So I think that's why there's a couple contested catches, maybe because of this, of a lack of true elite speed, but 50th percentile right in that kind of range is totally fine. Like we see guys like Davante Adams, which I believe Matt Harmon from Reception Perception, that's one of his kind of high-end comps. And Davante Adams isn't blowing by everybody all the time, but because he can set up every single route and knows when to sit in zone and all that type of stuff, he can still win over the top and the contested catches and all that stuff. So I think trying to comp him to Davante Adams is such a huge thing, but you don't have to be an elite speedster, but I would say that's probably his big negative right now.
Sitting in zone was a thing I wanted to bring up because he's exceptional at it. And in fact, I think maybe his yards after catch numbers are best in that area. There were times in sitting in zone where he would make his frame much smaller when working through or around the underneath defender. And then he did such a good job of understanding the space of, hey, I need to sit here 3 yards in front of the overhanging defender. And then I catch it away from my frame and I still turn and pick up another 5 yards after the catch. Like that feel for zone. I mean, we talk about it every single week on this channel with NFL fantasy football. Some wide receivers have real splits when it comes to man and zone defenses. I don't think Odunze is going to be one of these guys because he has such a great feel for both.
Well, the other thing is the NFL is a zone league now on defense. Like we always talk about, you have to be able to beat man coverage, but if you don't have a good feel for zone coverage, I mean, that's like 70% of the snaps that you're facing is against zone coverage. And that's when I had pain in the ass to tackle. It was a lot of these zone catches and get up field and break one tackle, or not even break one, just finish a tackle. And that's
hidden yards.
Yeah. Those 2-3 yards, but a lot of them, that's right where the first down marker was. Statistically, not being an early declare does work against him if you're just trying to nitpick here, but I really don't think that's an issue because he's not like an old prospect, still only 22 years old. So that's kind of like the one flaw to his statistical profile, but popped him in the model, 97th percentile. He's going to go top 10. He might go to the Bears or something like that. So yeah, I think that he's very polished. I'm not sure he's going to be like an all pro, but he can be right kind of in that next tier. And
he can be a primary pass catcher for an NFL team.
Hell yeah. I think that's like likely to happen.
Yeah. And when anyone sees like a full green route tree of success rates from Matt Harmon and Reception Perception, I think that they perceive that meaning to be he's going to be a perfect prospect. I would say Matt would even advise you that that doesn't mean he is a perfect prospect. I don't think Rome Odunze is a perfect prospect, but it just shows you how consistently good he is at every level of the field, different routes and against man. and against zone. That is really impeccable stuff that Rome Odunze brings to the table.
I settled as my wide receiver 3 right behind Marvin, then Malik Nabers.
I do think there is a tier break between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers. I think that's the big conversation here. Some want to make it a 4, adding Brian Thomas Jr. into this. Some want to make it a 3 with Rome Odunze. I want to make it a 2 and then Rome Odunze and then everyone after that.
All I know is it's number 1 in last year's class, like you mentioned.
This is true.
So
100%.
We're nitpicking.
In last year's class. All right. Go and watch the rest of the videos on the channel. The more of you that hit that subscribe button, the more videos we get to make for all of you. So before you go, hit the button, hit thumbs up, and we'll check you on the next one.